The desert wind brings change. The sun was not yet at its zenith, but already the air shimmered with the kind of heat that made metal hiss and the earth crack like old skin. In the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, where time seemed to fold into the folds of the desert hills, the wind whispered warnings no one ever truly listened to. It was here, amid the olive trees clinging stubbornly to the dry soil, that Amira Hassan moved with quiet determination. She wore a faded linen jalaba, its once bright embroidery now dulled by sun and dust. Her dark hair was coiled beneath a scarf, her hands calloused from pruning branches, coaxing roots, and nursing frail trees with the same care she gave her children. Yassine, aged 10 and ever curious, balanced on a stone wall watching her. Layla, just 6, knelt beside a watering can too heavy for her small arms, but too important for her pride to relinquish. "Layla, just a little on the roots, not the leaves," Amira said gently, adjusting her daughter's aim. Her voice carried the lilt of the south, soft yet filled with an iron strength forged through grief and endurance. Their grove was small, barely a dozen trees, but it was all that remained of her husband's legacy. He had died in a road accident 3 years earlier, and since then, survival had become both ritual and rebellion. Each olive tree that bloomed was a victory. Each day that passed without being displaced was a battle won, but on that particular morning, the wind had changed. A low rumble rose from the horizon, not from thunder or nature, but from engines, foreign and intrusive against the silence of the mountains. Amira looked up. Dust billowed in the distance like a warning. Yassine narrowed his eyes. "Mama, someone's coming." And someone was indeed coming. Prince Khalil al-Rashid did not look like the man in the newspapers. He was taller in person, more real, more undone. His tailored white linen shirt caught the sunlight as he stepped down from his black SUV, flanked by 2 aides in Western suits too tight for the heat. His presence disrupted the landscape. Everything about him was clean, sharp, expensive, out of place in a land where people lived on bread, olives, and borrowed time. He surveyed the grove with distant eyes, then turned to Amira, whose chin was already raised in silent resistance. "Amira Hassan?" he asked, his Arabic polished with a foreign edge. "I am Prince Khalil al-Rashid. I come on behalf of the Ministry of Land Reclamation and Royal Holdings. This property was officially transferred to the Crown 3 months ago." She said nothing, only adjusted her scarf. He handed her a document, heavy with stamps and legal weight. "You are being given 72 hours to vacate. Compensation will be arranged. There is a shelter in Ouarzazate that I am not leaving," Amira said simply. Khalil blinked. It was not anger or confusion on his face, but something else, disbelief perhaps. Few had interrupted him before, fewer still had contradicted him, and none had done it with such quiet defiance. His eyes flicked from her face to the children. Layla stood behind her mother, clutching her skirt. Yassine moved in front of them both. "This land belonged to my husband," Amira continued. "His father and his father before him. You may have stamps and papers, but these trees know my hands. I will not leave. There are laws, madam, and there is memory." The prince took a step back, not from fear, but to recalibrate. No one had prepared him for this. In the palace, matters were theoretical. Property disputes resolved with handshakes, evictions processed without a face. Here the face had emerald eyes and stood firm beneath the sun. "I am not here to threaten you," he said, "only to implement a transition. This land has been marked for development." "Into what?" she asked. "Hotels? Golf courses? You want to replace routes with concrete? It will bring jobs, infrastructure. It will bury what cannot be replaced." Their silence was only broken by the flutter of birds escaping the trees. Khalil turned slightly, signaling his aides to step away. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You cannot keep it. Even if I walked away now, They would return. With more papers, with police. Amira looked past him toward the dust still settling on the road. Then let them come. Something shifted in his posture. He had expected sorrow, perhaps pleading. He had not expected resistance polished into dignity. The woman before him had nothing, yet stood as though the earth itself upheld her. "I will come back," he said finally. 3 days. I suggest you prepare." She did not answer. As he walked back to the SUV, a breath of wind swept through the grove, carrying with it the scent of olives and sunburnt grass. Khalil glanced over his shoulder once. She was still standing there, still watching him. Inside the car, the air conditioning bit at his skin. One of his aides leaned in. "Shall I begin paperwork for enforcement?" He hesitated. "No, not yet." The drive back to the city was long, but Khalil barely noticed the mountains pass. The woman's face, her eyes more ancient than the hills, lingered in his mind like a riddle unsolved. At the grove, Amira folded the paper and tucked it into a rusted tin beneath the floorboards. She sat down on the steps beside her children, who looked at her with questions they were too afraid to ask. "Mama, is he a bad man?" Yasin whispered. She shook her head slowly. "No, just a man who has never had to fight for his home." That night, as the moon rose and the desert cooled, Amira walked between her trees, running her hands along the trunks. Each one told a story. Each one remembered the hands that had planted it, the rain that had fallen, the prayers whispered beneath its branches. The wind picked up again, and with it came something new, not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. In the palace, Prince Khalil stared at a map of royal properties, but saw none of them. He thought instead of a woman in the mountains, of children with sand on their feet, of eyes that refused to look away. Something about that encounter had unsettled him. It wasn't just the defiance. It was the feeling that for the first time in years, someone had spoken to him not as a prince, but as a man, and that, perhaps, was more dangerous than any legal battle. The desert wind had brought change, and it would not leave quietly. The weight of crown and conscience. The marble halls of the Al-Rashid Palace echoed with the steady rhythm of heels clicking against stone. The air inside was always cool, perfumed with orange blossom water and cedar oil, a stark contrast to the parched winds that swept across the desert just beyond the city. Here, among golden domes and fountains that whispered secrets into the silence, Prince Khalil al-Rashid sat in his study, alone, but never truly in solitude. He leaned back in a chair, too ornate for comfort, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The document Amira had refused still on the desk before him. He had read it again, though he knew its contents by heart. Everything was in order. Royal decree, legal signatures, official seals. It was final. But it felt hollow. His mind wandered back to her face. Dust on her cheeks, defiance in her voice, something ancient in the way she stood. Amira Hassan, a name he hadn't expected to remember. A woman he hadn't expected to resist. A soft knock broke his trance. The door opened without permission, as it always did when the intruder was the Sultan. King Samir al-Rashid swept in with the quiet authority of a man who had long since stopped needing to raise his voice to command a room. He was older now, but still bore the bearing of a general. Broad shoulders, sharp gaze, a silver beard trimmed to perfection. He wore a white kaftan embroidered in gold, and his mere presence shrunk the room. "You saw her then," the Sultan said, with no need for preamble. "I did. And she refuses to leave." The Sultan chuckled, but there was no mirth in it. They always do. These peasants cling to their patches of dirt as if the soil will protect them. "It isn't just dirt to them," Khalil murmured. "No," the Sultan agreed, pacing slowly. "It's memory. its loss, its stubbornness masquerading as tradition. But progress waits for no one. We are not building a kingdom of ghosts. We are preparing a nation for the future. Khalil looked up. Must it always be either or? The Sultan's gaze sharpened. You're not here to philosophize, Khalil. You're here to inherit. Your duty is to act. You have been raised for this, not to sympathize with villagers, but to lead them, even if that means pushing them. The conversation shifted abruptly. The princess arrives tomorrow, the Sultan added. Zara of Iraq, diplomatic bloodlines, excellent education, a fortune in emeralds. You will show her around the estate. Khalil closed his eyes for a breath too long. You arrange this without speaking to me. You are not a boy anymore. You are a man with obligations. You have seen what happens when a prince delays marriage. The court stirs, the ministries whisper. You need an heir. You need a wife. I need time. You had time. Now you have a timeline. With that, the Sultan turned and left, his robe trailing like a whisper of finality. Khalil remained still for several minutes, long after the door clicked shut. The walls pressed in, the air turned heavier. What troubled him wasn't simply the engagement or the development project. It was the memory of Amira's voice, ringing clear and unafraid in the sun. She had made no plea for mercy, no cry for help. She had stood as an equal, though the world would never admit it. Later that afternoon, he wandered through the gardens, manicured, geometric, sterile, not a single leaf out of place. But all he could think about were the twisted olive branches of the grove. They had character, history. These roses were too well behaved. He passed a cluster of officials, each bowing quickly. Their conversations faded as he approached. It was always this way. He was respected, admired even, but rarely spoken to as a man, only as a prince. When evening came, Khalil sat alone on a rooftop terrace, the call to prayer echoing in the distance, long and plaintive. Below, the city shimmered in a haze of heat and memory. The lights of Marrakech flickered far to the west. Somewhere in the shadow of the mountains, Amira would be preparing dinner for her children, maybe sitting on the floor as they played, their laughter echoing off stone walls older than any royal decree. He imagined her hands slicing bread, feeding Layla from her own plate, brushing dust from Yasin's hair. The simplicity of it hurt. It was a life without riches, without servants, without insulation. And yet, in that life, there was something he had never tasted: truth. The next morning, the palace awoke early. The arrival of Princess Zara required preparation on a grand scale. White carpets were unrolled. Musicians rehearsed traditional anthems, and a feast was planned that would feed a village. She arrived in a silver Rolls-Royce, draped in silk the color of moonlight, her entourage trailing behind her like a moving mosaic of luxury. Zara was striking, tall and composed, her smile practiced but sincere. She bowed to the Sultan, kissed the Queen's cheek, and extended a hand to Khalil. "I've heard you're difficult," she said, her voice like honey wrapped in steel. He smiled faintly, "And I've heard you never blink." They were well matched by all appearances, photogenic, diplomatic, compatible. But Khalil felt the falseness in it, the way one feels a silk curtain where there should be a breeze. Zara was poised and intelligent, but she knew nothing of olive trees or defiance. Her hands bore no scars. They toured the palace together. She praised the architecture, asked questions about solar panels and water purification systems. She was modern, future-focused, and yet every step with her felt choreographed, every word calculated. He found himself searching for something unpolished, some sign of the raw and unfiltered, but there was none. That night, Khalil returned to his study and reread the report on Amira. It was sparse: widow, 2 children, former schoolteacher, no criminal history, no political affiliations. A small file for a woman who had taken up so much space in his mind. He stared at the map. The olive grove was marked with a red X, a minor project, a footnote in royal plans, but in his heart it had become a crossroads. Later, unable to sleep, he rose and opened the window. The desert wind was back, warm, persistent, whispering of change. He closed his eyes, and in that wind he heard something else, not words, not prophecy, just the unmistakable pull of a different truth. Duty was a crown he had worn all his life, but conscience, that was heavier. And now, for the first time, it pressed against his chest like armor too tight to breathe in. In the darkness, Khalil made a decision. It wasn't yet rebellion, it wasn't yet love, but it was the first crack in the walls he had lived behind all his life. The prince would ride again, but not toward the palace gates. This time, he would return to the woman who had not asked for salvation, but had challenged him to feel. Midnight confessions. The desert is a different world at night. The relentless sun disappears, and in its place, the stars claim dominion over the heavens. The wind grows cooler, more contemplative, brushing against the sand like an old storyteller leaning in to whisper forgotten truths. It was in this hush that Prince Khalil al-Rashid, cloaked in a plain burnous and riding a black stallion named Zafir, left behind the palace walls and the promise of a kingdom. No convoy followed him. No guards trailed in his shadow. It was as though he disappeared, slipping into the folds of the night like smoke. He took the long path, avoiding the paved roads built by royal decree, choosing instead the old caravan trails, the ones worn into the earth by generations of those who had walked without title, but with purpose. He rode not toward duty, but toward a question that had taken root in his soul, a question with emerald eyes and olive-stained hands. The moon hung low, a silver coin tossed carelessly across the sky. As the grove came into view, nestled like a secret against the spine of the Atlas Mountains, Khalil slowed Zafir to a walk. The trees were ghostly under moonlight, their twisted limbs casting shadows like fingers reaching for answers. He dismounted without a sound, tethered the horse near the old well, and began to walk. There she was. Amira stood beneath the largest olive tree, a tin pail in one hand, a rusted hoe in the other. Her scarf had slipped slightly, revealing a dark braid streaked with dust and moonlight. She didn't look up at first, too focused on the sick tree before her, its leaves brittle, its trunk split by age and thirst. She poured water slowly, not wasting a drop. It was a ritual more than a task. Khalil watched from a distance, uncertain. How did one approach a woman who had become a mirror for your own unrest? She sensed him before she saw him. Her back straightened, not in fear, but readiness. When she turned, there was no surprise in her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice hushed, not out of caution, but respect for the night. "I couldn't sleep." "There are pills for that, or wine, or women. I wanted the truth instead." She regarded him for a moment, then set down her tools. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but charged with the weight of things unsaid. He stepped forward, slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt if startled. "I came to see the trees," he said. "Then look." He did, really looked. The trees were tired, yes, struggling, but still they stood. Roots deep, branches scarred, alive. "You're trying to save this one," he said, nodding toward the sick tree. "They're all sick. The soil is dry, the well's almost empty, but I try anyway." He knelt beside her, fingers brushing the cracked earth. "Why not leave?" "Because everything I love is here. Everything I remember. My husband carried Layla through this grove when she was too small to walk. Yasin used to sing to the olives, believing they'd grow faster if they were happy." Khalil smiled faintly. "Did it work?" "They're still alive." Silence again. Then she asked, "Why are you really here?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I saw something in your eyes that I haven't seen in years. Something real. Everyone in my world speaks in masks and mirrors. You don't." "I don't have time to lie," she replied simply. He looked at her then, truly looked. Her face was tired but not weary. There was a strength in her, not the kind taught in military academies or inherited through lineage, but the kind born from enduring heartbreak and still choosing to hope. "I didn't come to apologize," he said. "I didn't ask you to. But I want to understand how you keep going, how you can lose so much and still believe." Amira didn't answer immediately. She walked to a wooden crate and sat, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "When my husband died, the village elders told me to move to the city. They said a woman can't manage land, that the trees would wither without a man's touch. But every morning I wake up and look at my children, and I think, if I leave, what do I teach them? That we are temporary, that roots don't matter." She met his gaze. "I stay because if I vanish, so does his memory. So does my worth. And I don't want my daughter growing up thinking her place is only where someone else gives her permission to be." Khalil sat beside her, the wood creaking beneath his weight. "My mother said something similar once, before she was married off to my father." "What happened to her?" "She became what the court required, a queen, silent, dignified, and very alone." "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "It's strange. All my life, I've been trained to lead, but no one ever taught me how to feel without it being seen as weakness." Amira reached down and scooped a handful of dry soil, letting it run through her fingers like time itself. "Maybe feeling is leadership. Maybe it's the only kind that matters." A soft rustle interrupted them. They both turned. Flashlights flickered in the distance, voices, the rhythmic stomp of boots against gravel. "They're looking for you," Amira said, her voice low. Khalil stood, tense. "Palace guards." She rose too, moving quickly to the grove's edge. "This way. There's a path behind the trees. It leads down to the riverbed. They won't find you if you stay low." He paused, torn between staying and protecting her, or leaving and protecting them both. "Go," she said firmly, "before they do something neither of us can undo." He took a step back, then hesitated. "Will you be all right?" "I've survived worse than your soldiers." He looked at her one last time. "I'll come back. Don't make promises you can't keep." "I don't," he said. "Not anymore." And then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the trees. Amira stood there, heart pounding, watching the flashlights grow closer, then veer off in the opposite direction. When the last echo of voices faded, she let herself breathe again. She returned to the sick tree, picked up her pail, and poured the rest of the water at its base. The earth sighed, grateful. Far away atop a sand ridge, Khalil paused to look back. The grove was barely visible now, just a smudge of darkness against the silver plain. But he felt it, felt her. Something had shifted between them, not romance, not yet, but recognition, a crossing of paths that refused to remain parallel. That night, as he returned to the palace through a hidden gate and slipped past sleeping guards, Khalil knew he could no longer pretend to be untouched. The woman in the mountains had done what no decree or diplomacy ever could. She had made him remember what it meant to be human. And though the kingdom still waited, and duty still pressed like a yoke on his shoulders, something had begun to fracture beneath the surface. The truth, like the desert wind, had found a way in, whispers in the marketplace. The village of Tazulite was a cluster of stone dwellings, nestled between the rough folds of the Atlas Mountains, where wind-swept rooftops overlooked dusty alleys, and the call to prayer traveled further than any rumor could, though not faster. At sunrise, the light filtered through narrow wooden shutters, spilling onto threadbare rugs and ancient walls. The scent of mint tea and ash-baked bread rose from clay ovens, and above it all, voices, soft at first, began to stir. They began like a whisper caught in the breeze, something uncertain and half-believed. that the prince had returned in the night, that he had been seen walking alone in the olive grove, that he had spoken with Amira Hassan, the widow, that he had been kind. In marketplaces, nothing stays secret for long. The butcher's wife told the baker's apprentice, who mentioned it to the spice seller, who passed it on to the schoolteacher. And by the time the sun reached its peak, the story had grown teeth. By noon, old Hassan, the village elder, sat beneath the awning of the tea house, his prayer beads moving slowly between gnarled fingers, his eyes watching everything. He had lived long enough to know that power only tolerated disobedience when it was hidden, and Amira's resistance, once admirable in its quiet desperation, was becoming something else entirely, visible. He sipped his tea slowly and leaned toward a merchant from the next village. They say she lured him, that she used her widow's sorrow to seduce sympathy from a prince. The merchant raised an eyebrow. And the children? Pawns. They soften the heart. Clever woman. Hassan's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. What he said echoed through ears conditioned to suspicion, in a society where reputation was fragile and easily shattered. At the well, where women filled their jugs and children played barefoot in the mud, Amira could feel the shift. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations hushed as she approached. Even Layla, holding her mother's hand, noticed the change. "Mama," she whispered, "why won't they smile today?" Amira offered her daughter a strained smile. "They're just tired, Habibti." But she knew better. She felt it in the way they looked at her, like something dangerous, something shameful, as if she had stepped out of place. By late afternoon, the rumors had reached the palace. Zara of Iraq had arrived only 2 days earlier, but she had already made her presence felt. Her beauty was indisputable, porcelain skin framed by raven black hair, a poise cultivated in boarding schools and diplomatic salons. She wore perfume imported from Paris and never raised her voice, but when she entered a room, people noticed. She was walking with Khalil through the royal gardens when she first mentioned it, casually, as though it were an afterthought. "I hear the villagers have taken a liking to your humanitarian visits," she said, her tone soft but edged. Khalil didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on a dying fig tree in the far corner of the garden. It reminded him of the grove. Zara continued, "They say you've grown fond of a woman there, a widow. What's her name? Amira?" He turned to her slowly. "Is this interrogation part of the engagement package?" She smiled without warmth. "I'm not jealous, Khalil. You're free to mingle with the poor. It's touching even. But don't confuse curiosity for connection. These people will take what they can, and then they'll resent you for giving it." She didn't ask for anything. That makes her the most dangerous kind. Later that evening, Zara made her way to the village under the pretext of inspecting local women's initiatives funded by royal charity. She arrived in a sleek SUV, flanked by photographers and palace aides. Her white dress fluttered like a dove in the wind, her heels unsuited to the gravel paths. The village fell silent as she stepped out, her smile radiant, her presence both admired and feared. She visited the school, the mosque, the women's weaving cooperative. And then, as though by accident, she wandered toward the olive grove. Amira stood by the trees, a basket of olives in her arms, her children chasing each other nearby. She turned as Zara approached, already aware of the cameras clicking in the background. "You must be Amira," Zara said, her tone dipped in civility. "I've heard so much." "I'm sure you have," Amira replied, not bowing, not offering her hand. Zara's smile never wavered. "These trees are charming, but I imagine the upkeep is exhausting for one woman." I manage. "Yes, but for how long?" It was not a question. It was a warning, wrapped in politeness, sharpened like a blade. Amira set down her basket. "If you're here to threaten me, do it without the mask." "I'm here to offer you perspective," Zara said, brushing dust from her sleeve. "The prince belongs to a world you can never enter, and soon he will be mine. Whatever connection you think you share, it will pass. Like a storm." Amira stepped closer, voice low but steady. "He's not a thing to be owned." Zara's eyes narrowed. "No, he's a crown, and crowns are not given to those who bleed in silence. They're worn by those who know how to survive palaces." They stood there for a moment, two women from different realms, bound by the same man and the impossible world around him. Then Zara turned and left, her train brushing the ground behind her like a closing curtain. That night, Amira found Yasin and Layla asleep on the floor, their bodies curled in the shape of trust. She sat beside them, brushing hair from their foreheads. A letter lay beside her, unsigned but clear in intent. "This is not your place. Leave before you destroy what remains." She folded it without emotion, but inside something cracked. Not fear, she had faced that long ago, but weariness. A kind of exhaustion no sleep could fix. The next morning, she went to the marketplace to sell her last jars of preserved olives. The stalls were louder than usual, the stares sharper. Hassan stood by the bread seller, shaking his head as she passed. She didn't meet his gaze. "Mama," Yasin said, tugging at her sleeve, "why are they staring?" "Because sometimes," she whispered, "people fear what they do not understand." That evening, Khalil received word. A palace servant, sympathetic but cautious, slipped him a note. "There are threats against her," it read. "From within, from Zara, from the court. Act soon or lose her." Khalil stood by the window for a long time, watching the shadows stretch across the stone floors. Outside, the first stars blinked into view. Somewhere, just beyond reach, was the woman who had unmade him with her silence, who had taught him that dignity could live in dust, that love could rise from cracked earth. He turned from the window, heart heavy with decision. The world was watching now, and it had chosen sides. The price of honor. The palace shimmered under the midday sun, a mirage of white marble and blue mosaics that hid 1,000 secrets behind its golden gates. Within its walls, silence had a different weight. It was not peace, but pressure, measured, calculated, wrapped in layers of formality. The halls echoed with the footsteps of servants who knew when not to speak. And in the heart of it all, Prince Khalil al-Rashid stood before the council chamber, fists clenched, pulse a quiet thunder in his ears. The letter was still in his hand. It bore no signature, no crest, only the truth. Amira was being harassed, threatened, not by peasants, not by strangers, but by the palace itself, by the woman he was expected to marry, by the machinery of legacy he had been raised to operate. He had suspected. Now he knew. When he entered the chamber, the council was already seated, advisors, ministers, and his father, the Sultan, at the head. They looked up, surprised by his sudden appearance, but no one spoke. "I want names," Khalil said, his voice low but sharp. "Now," the Sultan arched an eyebrow. "You walk into a royal council and bark commands? Has love made you a fool already?" "Love hasn't made me a fool," Khalil replied, "but silence might." There was a pause, then a quiet clearing of a throat. Minister Aziz, head of internal affairs, adjusted his spectacles and said cautiously, "We received intelligence that the woman, Amira Hassan, has become a symbol. She is being watched closely." Khalil stepped forward. "Is that what you call it now? Watching? Sending letters? Harassing a mother of two?" "No official order was given," Aziz said quickly. "No," Khalil snapped, "because nothing here is ever official when it's cruel." The Sultan rose slowly, his robes cascading like a tide. "You forget your place." "I remember it too well," Khalil said. "That's the problem." A hush fell. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "I warned you," the Sultan continued, "that this path leads nowhere, that indulging sympathy for a widow would end in disgrace. Yet here you are, defending her over your family, over your duty." "She is not a disgrace," Khalil said. "She is dignity you could never purchase with gold. And if this is what duty demands, threats, manipulation, silence, then perhaps duty is the disgrace." "Careful," the Sultan warned. "I'm past careful." The meeting dissolved in murmurs as Khalil turned and left, not waiting to be dismissed. He walked through the corridors as if through a dream, one that had turned darker with each step. He passed portraits of ancestors in ceremonial robes, men who had conquered deserts, brokered treaties, crushed uprisings. And now he, the heir, the favored son, was walking away from that lineage towards something the palace could not contain. He rode out that night alone. The road to Tazulait had become familiar now. Each bend, each olive branch, each scent of cumin and dust marked the journey. But this time, the ride felt heavier, charged with urgency and quiet fury. When he arrived at the grove, the sun was just slipping behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land. He found Amira sitting by the steps of her home, the children inside, their laughter muffled by stone walls. She looked up, unsurprised. "You came." "I had to." He dismounted and sat beside her. Neither spoke for a moment. "They've started following me," she said. "2 men at the market, another at the well. They don't speak, but they want me to know they're there." He nodded. "I know. Zara is behind it. She came here, tried to intimidate me." "I'm sorry." Amira shook her head. "Don't apologize. Act." He looked at her, the strength in her gaze, the calm that came not from naivety, but from surviving storms. "I confronted them," he said. "The council, my father. And I may have just declared war." She turned her head, studying him. "On who?" "On the idea that I must choose between love and legacy, between justice and obedience, but I know what side I'm on." "I never asked you to choose me." "I know. That's what makes this real." A silence fell between them, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with something warm, something growing, like light seeping into a locked room. Inside, Layla called for her mother. Amira stood. "Stay," she said softly. "Have dinner with us." He hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. That evening, the table was simple. Bread, lentils, olives. But it felt like a feast. Yasin asked questions, Layla offered him more tea than he could drink, and Amira smiled more than he had ever seen her smile. He was not a prince here. He was a man. And it was the first time he truly felt alive. After the children were asleep, they stood outside beneath the stars, the moon casting pale silver across their faces. "You know this can't last," Amira said. "I don't want it to last," he replied. "I want it to grow." "They'll never allow it." "Then let them try to stop me." She reached up, touched his face. "You're brave, Khalil. But bravery doesn't feed children. It doesn't protect you from exile." "Maybe not. But truth does something even more powerful. It frees you." She looked away toward the hills. "What now?" He exhaled slowly. "My engagement celebration is in 3 days. And? I'm not showing up." She blinked. "You would humiliate your family for this." "I'm not humiliating them," he said. "I'm showing them the future, a different kind." Amira didn't speak for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Do you know what happens when a woman like me is accused of dishonoring a man like you?" "Yes," he said. "That's why I'm going to take the dishonor for both of us." And in that moonlit grove, with only the night as witness, something passed between them. Not promises, not declarations, just understanding, just the seed of a new world. Back in the palace, Preparations for the celebration had begun. Fabrics imported from Istanbul, musicians rehearsing ancient ballads, dignitaries arriving in convoys, and Zara, flawless in every detail, preparing to claim a crown that was slipping through her fingers. But as the lights of the royal court burned brighter, the prince moved further into shadow, toward a truth no ceremony could erase. Honor, he had learned, was not in titles or traditions. It was in the courage to love what the world deemed unworthy, and the price of that honor. Everything he had once thought he wanted: sanctuary and sacrifice. The wind that swept across the plains that morning carried no scent of olive or warmth, only dust and foreboding. The skies above the Atlas Mountains remained a bleak grey, not stormy, but distant, as if the heavens themselves were withholding judgment. Amira stood in the middle of her small stone house, bags packed, her eyes fixed on the walls that had protected her children's laughter for so many years. The decision had already been made, but its weight settled like a stone in her chest. She had not told Khalil. She had not waited for him to come. Some choices are born not from courage, but from desperation. And Amira's silence was not a rejection of his love. It was a shelter built with maternal instinct, a final act of rebellion against a world that would never stop punishing her children for the audacity of her existence. "Mama, are we going somewhere fun?" Layla asked, holding a worn doll by one arm. Amira crouched beside her and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "We're going to the city, Habibti. Just for a little while. Somewhere safe." Yasin, older and more perceptive than she wished, watched her with furrowed brows. "Is it because of the prince?" She didn't answer, but he knew. The women's center in Marrakesh was quiet when they arrived, an old riad turned sanctuary, its white walls hiding stories that could break and rebuild anyone. No names were needed. Amira had stayed there once before, long ago, in the first days of her widowhood, when survival was new and terrifying. The director, Fatima, greeted her not with surprise but with open arms. "They said you'd come back when you were ready," Fatima said, guiding her into a small room with a single bed and a rust-colored rug. "You are safe here, for as long as you need." Amira nodded, unable to speak. She set her children on the bed and began to unpack with the mechanical grace of someone who had left too many homes behind. That night, she sat on the rooftop of the center, overlooking the humming chaos of Marrakech below. The city lights shimmered, defiant against the dark. She thought of the grove, of her trees standing alone under the moon. She thought of Khalil, of his hands gripping hers, of his voice beneath the stars. She whispered into the wind, "I'm sorry." Far away, in a palace filled with opulence and emptiness, Khalil stood in a chamber filled with celebration. The engagement banquet had begun. The musicians played a slow, traditional melody. Silver platters gleamed with roasted meats and spiced fruits, and guests offered blessings laced with expectation. But there was no joy in his eyes. He scanned the room. Zara was at the far end, radiant and unreadable, seated beside the Sultan, who smiled as though the kingdom had already been secured. Khalil's breath was shallow. He was suffocating in brocade and obligation. Then he saw a servant pass by with a folded note tucked into a tray of dates. The prince snatched it without thinking. Inside, in Fatima's familiar script, were just 5 words: "She's gone. To the shelter." Time fractured. He moved before his mind could catch up. Out of the banquet hall, down the mosaic corridors, past the guards who called his name. No explanations, no hesitation. Zafir was already saddled. The stable boy looked startled as the prince leapt into the saddle. "Where are you going, Your Highness?" "To bring someone home." And then he was gone, galloping into the night, the hooves beating like a second heart. The road to Marrakech was long, but the desert yielded to him. The stars blurred above, the scent of sand and acacia filled the air, and the sound of his breath mingled with the cries of wind. Each mile was a prayer, each gallop a plea. When he arrived, the sky was a pale pre-dawn blue. The city was just beginning to stir, shadows stretching across cobblestones like limbs waking from sleep. He dismounted at the edge of the Medina, pulled his hood low, and made his way through alleyways remembered only by instinct. The door to the women's center was closed. He knocked once, twice. Fatima opened it, her expression unreadable. "She doesn't want to be found," she said. "I'm not here to claim her," Khalil said softly. "I'm here to fight for her." Fatima studied him, saw the dust on his cloak, the exhaustion in his eyes. "She's on the roof." He climbed slowly, each step heavy with hope and fear. When he emerged into the open air, he found her sitting beneath a tattered shawl. The city spread before her like a painting she had stopped believing in. She didn't turn. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "I know." "Then why are you here?" "Because I couldn't stay away." She rose, facing him. "You promised me freedom, and I chose it. Why can't you let me go?" "Because I didn't promise you abandonment, and love isn't a chain, it's a choice. I choose you. You can't protect me from your world. Then let me destroy it for you." She shook her head, tears brimming. "And what happens when the world turns on you too, when your title is gone, your power? Then I'll be a man in love, and for the first time in my life that will be enough." They stood in silence, Marrakesh awakening beneath them, 1,000 calls to prayer beginning to rise, and then, from below, a voice. "Prince Khalil!" Zara had arrived. She stood in the courtyard, flanked by guards and officials, her face calm, but her eyes fire. "So it's true," she said, her voice echoing. "You've chosen this." Khalil stepped forward. "Yes." The Sultan arrived next, his robe whipping in the breeze, fury etched in every wrinkle. "Khalil al-Rashid," he bellowed, "you have humiliated your name, your lineage. I have honored it," Khalil said. "I've done what no man before me had the courage to do. I've chosen with my heart." The Sultan's face went pale. "Then you are no son of mine. Then I am finally free." Amira stood beside him, trembling but tall. Zara looked at her, something like pity flickering behind her mask. "You'll regret this, both of you." "No," Amira said, her voice like silk over steel. "Only if we'd let you win." And for a moment, silence fell again. Then the Sultan turned, storming out. The guards hesitated, unsure of whom to follow. And just like that, the kingdom began to tremble, not from rebellion, but from love. The confrontation. The courtyard of the Marrakesh Women's Center was not built for royalty. Its walls were faded, its tiles cracked from decades of sandstorms and rain. Yet, on that morning, it became a theater of destiny. No marble hall or velvet-draped chamber could have held more tension, more truth, than this modest space lined with jasmine and silence. Amira stood at the top of the steps, Khalil beside her, their shoulders just barely touching, but their resolve fused into something unbreakable. Below them, the courtyard bristled with presence. Princess Zara, statuesque and pale with restrained fury, remained motionless, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles blanched. The Sultan stood flanked by his advisors, his robes untouched by the dust, though his expression was cracked with disbelief and fury. Khalil stepped forward. He was no longer dressed like a prince. He wore a plain tunic, travel-wrinkled and stained from the road. There was no sword at his waist, no crest on his chest. And yet, never had he looked more like a leader. "I won't return to the palace," he said calmly. "And I won't return to the path that was carved for me before I knew what it meant to walk." The Sultan's voice was sharp, each word laced with decades of authority. "You speak of paths as if you are a wanderer. You are the crown prince of a lineage that has endured for centuries. And I will not be the link that breaks it, Khalil said, but I also will not be the link that lets it continue as a chain. Your betrayal is public, Zara interjected. Her voice did not tremble. You humiliated me before the court, the guests, the world. I did not choose to humiliate you, Khalil said, turning to her. I chose to be honest. It is not the same. Zara laughed, short and sharp. Honesty. You confuse weakness for virtue. Amira remained still, her gaze locked on Zara. She knew this moment would come. The judgment of women by women, sharper than any sword. You look down at me, Amira said softly, because I was not born into silk or ceremony, but I have raised 2 children on earth too dry to yield. I have buried a husband and kept his name sacred. If that makes me weak in your eyes, I accept the title, but I will not accept your scorn. You are nothing, Zara hissed, a field woman, a widow, and now the cause of a prince's disgrace. No, Khalil interrupted. She is the reason I know the difference between a crown and a cage. The Sultan took a step forward. This affair ends today. You are to return to the palace immediately. We will manage the damage, salvage your position, and proceed with the engagement. You will marry Zara as planned. No. The word fell like a blade. The crowd stiffened. Even the guards shifted uneasily. No, the Sultan repeated. Khalil turned to face him fully, his voice unshaken. I renounce the engagement. I renounce any throne built on fear and obedience, and if it costs me my name, then let it. There was a long silence, the kind that could unravel kingdoms. Then Zara, realizing that her part in this drama was now over, turned on her heel and walked out. Her entourage followed in silence. No anger, only the silence of a war lost before a single battle. The Sultan looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time, not as a prince, but as a man. He looked older in that moment, smaller. You think love will protect you, he asked, not cruelly now, but bitterly. You think it will sustain you when titles fall away and the world stops listening. No, Khalil said, but it will be mine, and it will be true. Amira descended the steps then, slowly. She stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. She had not asked for this war, but now she was part of it. The Sultan's voice, when it came, was quieter. Then go, leave this family, leave this palace. You will no longer bear my name nor my protection. You are no longer prince. You are no longer heir. The words spoken aloud echoed like the strike of a bell. Khalil didn't flinch. He only reached for Amira's hand. She took it, and together they turned and walked back into the shelter, leaving behind a dynasty forged in silence, a father carved from expectation, and a future rewritten with every step. Inside the shelter, the children were awake. Layla ran to her mother, clinging to her legs. Yasin stood near the door, trying to pretend he hadn't heard everything. Are we going home? He asked. Khalil crouched down and looked at him. Yes, he said. But first, we have to build one. That evening, the news spread like fire. The Crown Prince of Al-Rashid had renounced his title. He had chosen a common widow. The palace was in chaos. The Sultan refused all interviews. Zahra returned to Arak, her face unreadable, and the world began to whisper, not in shame but in awe. Some called it madness, some called it revolution. But the villagers of Tazulet, when they heard, smiled, because they had seen something before the rest of the world. They had seen a prince who looked like a man, and a woman who looked like a queen. In the grove, the olive trees stood tall in the moonlight. The wind moved through their branches like an old song, and beneath them, the earth waited, no longer barren, but filled with possibility. The confrontation was over. But the story was only beginning, breaking chains. The morning after the confrontation, the air felt different. Not freer, not yet, but thinner, like the first breath after a long plunge underwater. Khalil sat beside the window of a small rented apartment in the southern quarter of Marrakesh, watching the street below where vendors began arranging their stalls, where children chased each other in worn sandals, and where no one knew his name. No servants, no guards, no protocol, just life, unfolding at its own rhythm. He turned to see Amira asleep, curled around Layla on a mattress placed gently on the floor. Yassine lay nearby, his arm flung over a rolled-up blanket. For the first time in days, their faces were calm, undisturbed. He had not slept. Not because of regret, because of the weight that comes after a choice so large it shifts the orbit of your life. His phone vibrated, one of the few luxuries he had not discarded. A single message glowed on the screen. You are no longer welcome. You are no longer safe. Royal Security Bureau. He locked the screen and set the phone aside. It was not a threat. It was a fact. They were on their own now. Later that morning, they returned to Tazulite. The ride was long, but the moment they crested the final hill and the olive grove came into view, a hush fell over them. The trees were still there, untouched by power struggles, unaffected by gossip. The villagers, however, were another matter. They watched from doorways, from rooftops, from shaded alleyways, as the woman they had once pitied and whispered about returned. This time not alone, but with a former prince by her side. Some looked away, others nodded in quiet acknowledgement. A few, the boldest, offered shy greetings, but the air buzzed with a kind of fearful admiration. The grove was as they had left it, dry, tired, but still standing. Amira walked among the trees, fingers brushing bark like skin. She whispered to them, as if to reassure the roots that they had not been abandoned. Khalil stood behind her, watching. "This land still remembers you," he said. "I never forgot it," she replied. He turned toward the village, toward the uncertainty that hung like smoke over their future. "They don't know what to do with us. They don't have to," she said. "We're not here to be accepted. We're here to live." He smiled, spoken like a queen. "I don't want a crown. You already have one. You just wear it differently." As the days passed, whispers gave way to stares, and stares gave way to questions. Some came with curiosity, others with suspicion. The village elder, Hassan, kept his distance, but his influence remained. Rumors swirled. Was it true she would be given land titles? That the former prince had turned his back on his faith, his people, his heritage? The gossip was a quiet war. And Amira, though unbothered outwardly, began to carry its weight in the slump of her shoulders at night. "I never wanted to be anyone's symbol," she confessed one evening as they sat beneath the trees. "You're not," Khalil said. "You're a story they can't ignore." Stories are dangerous when they challenge the old ones. "Yes," he said, "but necessary." One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, a black SUV appeared at the edge of the village. It stopped in silence. No crest, no banners. But the moment the driver stepped out, Khalil knew. The Queen Mother. She wore black silk and sunglasses, and when she removed them, her eyes held no anger, only a depth that came from knowing too much and saying too little. Amira remained at the doorway of the house. Khalil approached his mother alone. "You look tired," she said. "I am. And stubborn. I inherited that." The Queen smiled faintly. "Do you love her?" "Yes." "Will you marry her?" "If she'll have me." She looked past him toward the house. "She will never be accepted at court. Not truly." "Then we will build something outside of it." The Queen exhaled, a long sigh of resignation and grace. "Then allow me to give you something that belongs to neither side." From the car, an aide retrieved a small box. Inside, a ring, not adorned with jewels, but a band of polished silver carved with olive branches. "It was mine once," she said, "before I became a queen, before I learned what I had to give up." Khalil took it with trembling hands. "She doesn't need a title," the queen added, "but she deserves to be chosen." As quickly as she had come, she left. That evening, under a bleeding sun, Khalil took Amira's hand and led her back to the grove. They stood beneath the oldest tree, its branches bent like the back of a storyteller. He knelt. "I have nothing left to offer you but a life we'll build together. No guards, no gold, just this, us, and this ring." She looked at him not with surprise, but with the same calm that had first unmade him. "I don't need a prince," she said, "but I will take the man." They embraced under the leaves, as wind passed through the grove like an old blessing. In the weeks that followed, work began. They tilled the earth. They gathered villagers who still believed in growth. A cooperative was formed. Women who had once hidden their faces behind shawls now brought jars of oil, baskets of olives, loaves of bread. They exchanged stories, not glances, and though the palace sent no acknowledgement and the press moved on to newer scandals, something had shifted. The land, for the first time in years, began to soften. Khalil worked beside them, not as overseer, but as equal. He traded calligraphy for carpentry, royal Arabic for the dialect of the hills. He smiled more, laughed freely. He was no longer heir to a kingdom. He was father to a grove, and beside him, Amira bloomed. At night, they would sit on the rooftop with the children curled between them, Layla reciting poems, Yasin practicing letters with Khalil. The stars above, endless and uncaring, bore witness to a new kind of royalty. A royalty born not of lineage, but of love. The chains had been broken, and though the world beyond the mountains still clung to its old stories, here, beneath the olives, a new one was being written. Love's true test. The village of Tazulite woke slowly to a morning of golden haze. The sun, veiled in desert mist, filtered its light through fig leaves and rooftops, casting soft amber shadows across the olive grove that had become more than just land. It had become a sanctuary. But in sanctuaries, peace is never permanent. Khalil stood by the well, drawing water with hands that no longer trembled with uncertainty. His shirt was damp, his brow lined with honest labor, and his heart steady. Yet in his chest, a flicker of apprehension remained. Change, no matter how desired, always left behind echoes of what had been lost. Inside their small home, Amira adjusted her daughter's dress, smoothing the wrinkled hem as Layla giggled, her laughter filling the quiet with innocence. Yasin was already outside, helping old Fatima stack crates of oil jars for the market. Life had become rhythmic, ordinary, beautiful. But that rhythm was about to break. Word had come in the early hours from the city, a letter delivered by hand, sealed not with the royal crest, but with something even more symbolic, the emblem of the Council of Royal Traditions, a body of elders older than the palace itself, custodians of lineage and custom, and more feared than kings. It was not a threat, it was an invitation. The council had summoned Khalil and Amira to the capital, publicly, formally, to explain their unorthodox union, to determine whether this love, forged in defiance, could ever be sanctified under royal law. For the first time in weeks, Amira felt the chill of her old life return, not in the wind, but in her chest. She remembered the way people had looked at her before, how judgment could be passed with silence sharper than a sword. And now, she would face not just whispers in a market, but tradition itself. That night, she sat beneath the stars, knees drawn to her chest, while Khalil watched her from the doorway. "They want to see if I'm worthy," she said. "No," he replied gently. "They want to remind me who decides what's worthy." "Same thing." He sat beside her. "We don't have to go. We can live here quietly. Build something no one can touch." She looked at him. But they already touched it. They've already planted the idea that we're not real unless they approve. That our children will grow up with questions no one will ask to our faces. Khalil reached for her hand. Then let them ask. Let them see what we are. But what if they ask me to change? Then you don't. She turned to him, her voice soft but fierce. I can't wear jewels and pretend I don't know the price of bread. I can't walk beside you in velvet while the women in my village bury their hopes in silence. I don't want you to. But if I become part of them, you won't, he interrupted. You'll become the part they never expected. The journey to the capital was quiet. No procession, no convoy, just a battered truck borrowed from a friend, dust curling behind its wheels like a question unanswered. The city greeted them not with banners, but stares. Photographers lingered near every corner. Headlines had already begun to circulate. The prince without a throne returns, but with what future? Widow or wife? The woman who dared love a crown. Dun royal law faces a new test. Can love redefine bloodlines? The council chamber was older than the palace, built of stone so dark it seemed to drink the light. Inside, 12 elders sat in a semicircle beneath tapestries, woven with the stories of dynasties long gone. Their faces were unreadable, not cruel, just untouched by time. Amira entered the chamber with Khalil beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back, a silent reminder, I am with you. They were not asked to bow, only to stand. An elder with white robes and sharper eyes leaned forward. You, Amira Hassan, have come not by invitation of the court, but by the consequences of a decision. Amira nodded. Yes. You refuse to leave royal land. You refuse to heed royal warnings. You refuse to remain unseen. I did. And now you wish to marry into the bloodline that gave those orders? I wish to marry the man who walked away from those orders. Another elder, female, her voice like velvet over marble, asked, Do you understand the responsibility of becoming a symbol? That from this moment, your life will not be your own? Amira answered without pause. It was never mine. It belonged to survival, to my children. But if I must live beneath a gaze, I will meet it with my head held high. A third elder turned to Khalil. You have renounced the throne. Do you still renounce it? I renounce any throne that comes with silence and chains. And if this union is denied, Khalil didn't hesitate. We marry anyway. The room fell into silence. Then the elder woman asked Amira softly, Do you love him? Amira's voice was steady. Enough to remain who I am beside him, not behind him. The council withdrew to deliberate. Outside, in the courtyard, the sky darkened. Thunder rumbled on the horizon. Khalil sat beside Amira on a stone bench. I told you we didn't have to come, he said. No, she replied. We did. Why? She turned to him. Because love is easy in the shadows. It's harder under a spotlight, and it's only real if it survives both. They were called back in at dusk. The chamber felt colder. The elders stood this time. The council cannot erase lineage, the white-robed man said, nor rewrite history. But history, he added, can be amended. He turned to Amira. We do not offer approval. We offer acknowledgement. This marriage will not grant you a title. It will not restore his. But it will be recognized. And our children? Khalil asked. They will carry no crest, the elder replied, but they will carry the story. Amira felt her knees weaken, not from defeat, from the weight of what had just been won. Later that night, back in the borrowed truck as they drove through the countryside toward the village, Khalil glanced at her. Are you disappointed? She shook her head. They didn't crown us, but they didn't stop us either. That's enough. And in her eyes, he saw it, the strength of a woman who had bent without breaking, who had loved without surrendering, who had passed the test not by pleasing the world, but by remaining true within it. The world had seen them now, and they had survived. Desert rose. The sun rose slowly over the Atlas Mountains, spilling molten gold across the peaks and valleys like a blessing whispered from the heavens. In the olive grove where this story had taken root, among trees shaped by wind, time, and silence, a wedding was unfolding, not with drums or trumpets, not with royal proclamations or veiled courtiers, but with breath, with light, with the rustle of leaves and the hush of a people learning to watch, not to judge. Amira stood beneath the largest olive tree, its branches bowing gently, as if acknowledging the moment. She wore a simple white kaftan, embroidered by hand in the old Amazigh style, gifted by the women of the village who, after all their suspicions, had begun to see her not as an outsider, but as one of them. Her hair was unbound, cascading like shadowed silk down her back, and around her wrist was tied a thin red thread, a tradition of protection given by Fatima that morning at dawn. Beside her, Yasin held a small basket of rose petals, his expression proud and impossibly serious. Layla clung to her mother's hand, her tiny face glowing with excitement and something deeper, joy without fear. Khalil approached on foot. He wore no robe of state, no sash, no insignia, just a linen tunic the color of sand and a smile carved from both peace and awe. His eyes never left Amira's. In them, he saw not just the woman he loved, but the road that had led him here, the choices, the risks, the losses, and the wild, improbable beauty of this new beginning. The officiant was an old man from the next village over, known not for ceremony, but for wisdom. He had been asked because he asked for nothing in return. He spoke softly, in the language of the mountains, his words floating like incense into the morning air. He spoke of land and roots, of vows made not in words, but in acts, of love that survives not despite imperfection, but because of it. He looked at Amira. Do you take this man not as prince or fallen heir, but as he is, flawed, human, reborn? She nodded. I do. He turned to Khalil. Do you take this woman not to save her, but to walk beside her as she is, fierce, whole, your equal? I do, he said. There were no rings exchanged, only hands joined together, and with them, a quiet promise. When they kissed, it was not to mark a conquest or a claim. It was the meeting of two souls that had already found home in each other long before this day. The villagers, gathered in respectful silence, began to clap, not loudly, but steadily, with smiles that grew as their fear dissolved. Bread was broken, tea was poured. Children laughed and ran between the trees. The grove, once a battleground of tradition and will, was now an altar of renewal. Later, as the sun climbed higher and the celebration softened into warmth and laughter, Amira and Khalil sat beneath their tree, their backs against its sturdy trunk, their children curled in the grass beside them. She rested her head on his shoulder. Do you regret it? She asked. He shook his head. Not for a moment. No part of you misses the palace. He thought of its marble floors, its silences, its mirrors that never showed him who he really was. It was never my home, he said. She smiled. Then let this be ours. They watched as villagers passed trays of sweets, as old Hassan finally approached to offer a reluctant blessing, as Fatima laughed too loud while chasing Layla through the field. And for the first time, Khalil understood something simple and eternal. Legacy is not what you inherit, it's what you plant. The olive grove would thrive again, not because of royal decree, but because two people had chosen to stay, to build, to believe. As the wind rose and swept through the trees, petals rained down from the baskets Yasin had forgotten on the ground. The petals danced in the air like old stories, unlearning themselves. And the desert, always watching, always waiting, finally smiled. Night falls gently in the mountains. It does not arrive with a crash, but with a hush, the way a mother tucks in a child, the way old songs return in dreams. The olive grove glows under the moonlight, its leaves silvered, its roots deep, its air filled with a peace no empire could fabricate. Inside the house, Amira rocks Layla to sleep. Yassine lies on a woven mat, reading by the light of a flickering lamp, the corners of his book dog-eared and worn. Khalil watches them from the doorway, his heart full not of titles, but of belonging. Their life is not perfect. The fields still require work. The village still whispers. The world still wonders what became of the prince who walked away. But here, beneath the sky, in the cradle of earth and love, they have all they need. Sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is stay. Sometimes, the boldest revolution is to choose tenderness over legacy, roots over reach. Sometimes a desert rose blooms not because the world allowed it, but because it refused not to. And so, if you ever find yourself wandering near the Atlas Mountains, listen. You might hear laughter among the olive trees. You might see a man and a woman walking together at sunrise, their fingers intertwined, their love unspoken but undeniable. And you might just believe, for a moment, that fairy tales were never about palaces at all, but about finding someone who sees you and stays.